There is something you have not been willing to consider, not because you haven't heard it before, not because the evidence isn't there, but because if you let yourself truly see it, if you let the full weight of it land, you cannot go back to the version of yourself who didn't know. And some part of you has been protecting that version, keeping it safe, keeping it small, keeping it in the dark where it doesn't have to answer the question that has been quietly pressing against the walls of your life for longer than you can remember. The question is this: what if you weren't chosen by accident? Not in a religious sense, not in a spiritual bypass sense where everything is fine and everything happens for a reason and you just need to trust the universe. No, that's not what we're doing here. We're doing something harder than that. We're looking directly at what the evidence actually shows when you stop flinching away from it. We're watching with the precision of a scientist and the stillness of someone who has finally decided to stop running, at what it means that you are here in this moment encountering something called the emerald signal. Because here's what no one tells you about being chosen. It doesn't feel like an honor. Not at first. It feels like pressure. It feels like a frequency you can't turn off. It feels like a knowing that sits in your chest at 3 a.m. that something is different about the way you experience reality. And you've been calling it anxiety or sensitivity or overthinking or being too much. Because those labels were safer than the alternative. The alternative being that you are not broken, you are tuned. And the emerald signal has been broadcasting to you your entire life. Look closer. Before we go where this is going, let's establish something foundational. Something that physics, not philosophy, not metaphysics, not ancient wisdom, but measurable, repeatable, peer-reviewed physics has confirmed about the nature of reality and the nature of observation. Because what we're about to explore is not a belief system, it's a description of how reality actually operates at its most fundamental level. And once you understand the mechanics, the rest of this becomes not just plausible, but inevitable. In 1927, at the Solvay Conference in Brussels, the most brilliant minds in the history of science gathered to try to make sense of something that was breaking every model they had. Quantum mechanics had revealed something that none of them wanted to be true. Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, Erwin Schrödinger, Albert Einstein, men who had built their entire intellectual lives on the premise that reality exists independently of the observer, were being forced to confront data that said otherwise. The data said that particles, the fundamental building blocks of physical reality, do not have definite properties until they are observed. They exist in a superposition, a simultaneous state of all possible configurations. And it is the act of measurement, the act of observation, that collapses that superposition into a single definite outcome. Einstein famously refused to accept this. He said, "Do you really believe the moon is not there when no one is looking?" And Bohr's answer, stripped of its diplomatic phrasing, was essentially, the question itself assumes something that the data no longer supports. The question assumes that being there is a fixed, observer-independent property, and quantum mechanics says it isn't. This is not fringe science. This is the foundation of every piece of technology you interact with every day. Semiconductors, lasers, MRI machines, the screen you're watching this on right now. All of it is built on equations that only work if you accept that the observer is not separate from the observed, that the act of looking changes what is looked at, that consciousness, or at minimum, the act of measurement, which is inseparable from consciousness, is not a passive recorder of a pre-existing reality. It is an active participant in the construction of what reality becomes. Now watch what happens when you take that principle and follow it all the way down. If observation collapses quantum possibility into specific physical form, if your attention, your focused awareness, your act of looking is literally what causes the wave function to choose a definite state, then what are you doing every single moment of your life? You are collapsing reality. You are, through the quality and direction and frequency of your attention, continuously participating in the selection of which version of the quantum field becomes your lived experience. Not as a metaphor, as a physical process. Most people never see this because they're too busy reacting to observe. They are caught in the feedback loop of their own collapsed reality, mistaking the solidified past for the fixed nature of things. They look at what is and conclude that it is what must be. They see the pattern and call it fate. They feel the frequency and call it personality. They experience the loop and call it life. But you've been watching something that doesn't fit the loop. Something that keeps appearing at the edges of your experience, in the synchronicities that are too precise to be coincidence, in the moments of inexplicable knowing, in the dreams that feel more real than waking, in the green. And there it is, isn't it? The green, the emerald, the color that keeps finding you in the moments when something is trying to break through. If this transmission is landing for you, if something in you is recognizing what we're pointing at here, like this video and subscribe to the channel so you stay in the field as each layer goes deeper. This is where it gets precise. The emerald signal is not a metaphor. It's a description of a specific frequency of consciousness, a particular quality of awareness that has been recognized across cultures, across centuries, across traditions that had no contact with each other, and yet converged on the same color, the same vibration, the same quality of seeing. The ancient Egyptians encoded it in the emerald tablet, Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, the master of three worlds, whose foundational text begins with the declaration that what is above is as what is below, that the entire structure of reality is a correspondence, a mirroring, a system of resonances in which the observer and the observed are not two separate things, but two aspects of the same signal. The Celts called it the green ray, the moment at sunset when the light bends through the atmosphere and, for a fraction of a second, emits a pulse of pure emerald that is said to grant the one who sees it the ability to see truly, not just with the eyes, with the whole instrument of consciousness. The ability to see what is actually there beneath the surface of appearances. In the Hindu tradition, the heart chakra, anahata, is emerald green. And what is anahata? It is the center that bridges the lower and upper, the material and the transcendent. It is the frequency at which the individual self becomes capable of perceiving its connection to the whole without losing its individual coherence. It is the frequency at which you can see yourself clearly enough to stop being run by what you haven't seen. The alchemists, and here's where the quantum mechanics becomes impossible to ignore, describe the philosopher's stone, the agent of transformation, as the viriditas, the greening, the living green force that transforms base metal into gold, not by adding something to it, but by revealing what was always already there, hidden beneath the dross. Look closer. What all of these traditions are pointing at, what the quantum mechanics confirms in its own language, is that there is a frequency of observation that transforms, not a frequency of doing, not a frequency of forcing or manifesting or attracting, a frequency of seeing A quality of attention so precise, so clear, so undefended, that when it contacts something, a belief, a pattern, a block, a possibility, that thing cannot remain as it was. It either reveals its true nature or it dissolves. And both of those outcomes are the same outcome, because what was blocking you was never the thing itself. It was the fact that you hadn't looked at it directly. The emerald signal is that frequency, and it chose you not because you are special in the way that ego wants to be special, not because you are better or more evolved or cosmically favored. It chose you because you are capable of looking, because somewhere in your history, in your making, in the particular configuration of consciousness that you are, there is a capacity for clear seeing that most people have been trained out of. Most people learned early that looking too clearly was dangerous, that seeing too precisely made you difficult, that knowing too much made you lonely. So they learned to look away. They learned to soften their focus. They learned to accept the surface as the whole. You never quite learned that lesson. And it has cost you. Let's be honest about that. The clarity has cost you. The knowing has cost you. The inability to unsee what you've seen has cost you relationships and comfort and the easy sleep of someone who doesn't know what you know. And there have been moments, many moments, when you wished you could just look away like everyone else seems to be doing. When you wanted the frequency to turn down. When you wanted to just fit into the reality that everyone around you seemed to be inhabiting without effort, but the signal didn't turn down. Because it's not a signal you're receiving from outside, it's a signal you are. And you cannot turn off what you fundamentally are, no matter how many layers you put over it. This is not what you think it is. Let me show you something. There is a story about a woman named Mira who lived in a village at the edge of a great forest. Mira had a gift that no one in the village could quite name. When she looked at something, really looked, with the full force of her attention, it changed. Not dramatically, not in ways that were obvious to the casual observer, but the people who knew her noticed it. The sick child she sat with for hours, watching with quiet attention, who recovered when the physician had given up. The argument between neighbors that dissolved when Mira simply looked at both of them in turn, not saying a word. The withered tree in the village square that bloomed out of season the spring after Mira began sitting beneath it each morning. The village elders called it a blessing. The fearful called it witchcraft. The children, who are always the most honest observers, called it simply the way Mira sees. What none of them understood, what Mira herself didn't fully understand, was the mechanics of what she was doing. She wasn't sending healing energy. She wasn't casting spells. She wasn't even, in any conventional sense, trying to change anything. She was simply looking without looking away. She was bringing the full instrument of her consciousness to bear on whatever was in front of her, without flinching, without judging, without needing it to be different than it was. And in that quality of seeing, in that pure, undefended, unhurried observation, the thing she was watching had no choice but to reveal its true nature. And its true nature, it turned out, was always more whole, more alive, more resolved than its surface appearance suggested. One day, a merchant came to the village with something to sell. He was a man of considerable intelligence and considerable cleverness, and he had heard of Mira's gift. He came not to be healed, but to acquire. He wanted to know the technique. He wanted to bottle the method. He sat with Mira for 3 days, watching her watch things, taking careful notes on the angle of her head, the quality of her stillness, the duration of her gaze. At the end of 3 days, he believed he had decoded it. He went home and practiced what he had observed. He stared at things. He held his gaze steady. He timed his watching. Nothing changed. He returned to Mira, frustrated, and demanded to know what she was doing that he wasn't. Mira looked at him for a long time before she answered, and when she answered, she said only this: "You are watching to get something. I am watching to see what is already there." The merchant went away and spent years trying to understand the difference. And the difference, when he finally saw it, when he finally stopped watching to acquire and started watching to truly see, was this. He had been looking at things as objects, as separate from himself, existing out there, to be assessed and evaluated and used. Mira had been looking at things as expressions of the same field she herself was an expression of. She had been watching with the recognition that what she was seeing was not separate from what was seeing it. And that recognition, that collapse of the false boundary between observer and observed, was the emerald signal. That was the frequency that transformed. And you have been both the merchant and Mira. You have been both the one who watches to get and the one who watches to see. And something in you, in the moments when you are most yourself, most undefended, most clear, something in you knows the difference. Something in you has always known. Now watch what happens. Let's go deeper into the quantum mechanics of this, because this is where the science stops being comfortable and starts being revolutionary. The double slit experiment is the most famous demonstration of the observer effect. You fire particles, the photons, electrons, through 2 slits in a barrier, and you look at the pattern they make on a screen behind the barrier. When you don't measure which slit each particle goes through, you get an interference pattern, the pattern of a wave, as if each particle went through both slits simultaneously and interfered with itself. When you place a detector at the slits to measure which one each particle goes through, the interference pattern disappears. The particles behave like particles. They go through one slit or the other. The wave function collapses. Here's what this means. Stated as precisely as possible, the act of gathering information, the act of measurement, which is to say, the act of a conscious system interacting with a quantum system, fundamentally alters the behavior of the quantum system. The particle, before measurement, exists in a superposition of all possible paths. The moment it is observed, it chooses one, not randomly. The probabilities are determined by the wave function, but the specific outcome is not fixed until the observation occurs. Now here's the layer underneath that. And this is where most physics education stops because it gets uncomfortable. The question of what constitutes an observer in quantum mechanics is not settled. The Copenhagen interpretation says any measurement device will do. But the von Neumann-Wigner interpretation, which is mathematically equivalent and was championed by 2 of the greatest mathematical physicists of the 20th century, says that the collapse of the wave function requires a conscious observer, not just a detector, not just an apparatus, consciousness itself. John von Neumann's mathematical proof of this was published in 1932 and has never been refuted. Eugene Wigner, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics, extended it and argued that consciousness is not produced by the physical universe. It is a fundamental feature of reality that the physical universe exists within. This is not mysticism, this is rigorous mathematics applied to the most precisely tested theory in the history of science. And what does it mean for you? It means that your consciousness, your capacity for observation, is not a product of your brain that somehow watches the universe from the inside. It means your consciousness is the field within which the universe is taking specific form. It means the observer is not inside the experiment. The observer is the condition that makes the experiment possible. You are not in the quantum field. The quantum field is in you. Or more precisely, you and the quantum field are not two separate things. You are a local expression of the field observing itself. And the quality of that observation, the clarity, the depth, the willingness to see without flinching, determines which of the infinite possible configurations of the field collapse into your specific lived reality. This is where it gets precise. This is where the emerald signal stops being a poetic concept and becomes a description of a specific capacity that you either exercise or you don't. The capacity to observe without distortion, the capacity to see what is actually there rather than what your conditioning, your fear, your identity, your past has trained you to see. The capacity to look at the quantum field of your own life, your relationships, your patterns, your body, your recurring situations, and see them clearly enough that they have no choice but to collapse into their next, more coherent form. Because here's what no one tells you about observation. When you observe something with genuine clarity, when you see a pattern in yourself without judgment, without the need to fix it, without the flinch of shame or the armor of rationalization, the pattern cannot maintain its current configuration. It's not that you're sending it love and light. It's not that you're healing it with your intention. It's simpler and more radical than that. The pattern was only able to persist because it was not being fully observed. The moment you look at it directly, the moment the full light of your consciousness falls on it without the usual deflections, it loses the quantum uncertainty that allowed it to be in multiple states simultaneously. It collapses. And what it collapses into is always more coherent, more integrated, more aligned with the fundamental nature of what you actually are than the distorted form it had been taking in the dark. Sit with that for a moment. Don't rush past what you just saw, the things in your life that are not working, the patterns that repeat, the blocks that persist, the situations that seem to regenerate no matter how much you try to change them. They are not problems to be solved. They are quantum systems that have not yet been fully observed. They are wave functions that are still in superposition because you have been looking at them with one eye closed. Because you have been looking at the symptom and not the structure. Because you have been looking at the surface and not the signal underneath. And the emerald signal, the frequency of clear, undefended, transformative observation, is the quality of seeing that collapses those wave functions, not into what you want them to be, into what they actually are. And what they actually are is always more workable than the story you've been telling about them. Pause here. This is not a thought exercise, this is an observation. I want you to think of one thing in your life right now that you have been looking at with one eye closed. Not a small thing. The thing, the situation, the pattern, the relationship, the aspect of yourself that you have been circling without landing on. The thing you approach and then retreat from. The thing you think about and then distract yourself from thinking about. You know what it is? You've known what it is for a long time. The knowing has been sitting in your chest like a stone that you keep stepping around. Don't analyze it. Don't try to fix it. Don't explain it to yourself. Just look at it. Right now, in this moment, with the full instrument of your attention. Let the full light of your awareness fall on it without flinching. Watch what you feel when you do. Watch the resistance that arises, the impulse to look away, to think about something else, to qualify and complicate and explain. Watch the resistance. Don't fight it, just observe it, because the resistance itself is information. The resistance is showing you exactly where the quantum superposition is, exactly where the wave function is still uncollapsed, exactly where the emerald signal is asking you to look. Notice what happens to the thing when you look at it without looking away. Notice if it shifts. Notice if it becomes less solid, less fixed, less inevitable than it seemed when you were circling it. Notice if something in your body relaxes, not because the situation has changed, but because the act of truly seeing something releases the energy you were spending on the act of not seeing it. That release, that settling, that is the beginning of the collapse. That is the first movement of the wave function toward coherence. That is the emerald signal doing what it does when you stop blocking it with your avoidance. Drop a comment right now and tell me what you saw when you stopped looking away. Not what you think about it. What you actually saw when the full light of your attention landed on it. The field of observers watching this alongside you amplifies what you name. Come back now. Let's go deeper. There's a concept in quantum mechanics called quantum coherence. It describes the state in which quantum systems maintain their superposition, their ability to be in multiple states simultaneously over time. Quantum coherence is extraordinarily fragile. It is disrupted by interaction with the environment, by measurement, by anything that introduces information into the system. This is why quantum effects are usually only observed at subatomic scales and at temperatures near absolute zero. The warm, noisy, information-rich environment of ordinary reality constantly disrupts quantum coherence and forces systems to collapse into classical, definite states. But here's what's extraordinary. In the last 2 decades, quantum biologists have discovered that biological systems, living systems, maintain quantum coherence in ways that should be impossible given the warm, wet, noisy environment they operate in. Photosynthesis, the process by which plants convert light into energy, has been shown to use quantum coherence to achieve energy transfer efficiency that no classical system could match. Bird navigation uses quantum entanglement in the proteins of the avian eye to detect the Earth's magnetic field with a precision that classical chemistry cannot explain. And there is growing evidence, still controversial, still being debated at the edges of neuroscience, that the human brain, specifically the microtubules within neurons, may maintain quantum coherence in ways that are relevant to consciousness itself. What this means, and stay with me here because this is where the science and the signal converge, is that living systems, and perhaps conscious systems in particular, are not simply subject to quantum mechanics in the way that rocks and gases are. Living systems have evolved to harness quantum mechanics, to use the superposition, the coherence, the entanglement, the non-locality of the quantum field as functional tools for navigating reality at a level of precision and efficiency that classical physics cannot account for. You are not a classical system that happens to be made of quantum parts. You are a quantum system that has evolved the capacity to maintain coherence, to hold multiple possibilities in superposition, and to collapse those possibilities through the act of conscious observation into specific, chosen outcomes. And the emerald signal is the frequency at which that capacity operates at its highest efficiency. It is the quality of conscious observation, clear, coherent, undefended, precisely focused, at which the quantum field of your life responds with maximum sensitivity, at which the wave functions that have been stuck in superposition, the possibilities that have been hovering unrealized in the quantum field of your potential, finally have the information they need to collapse into form. Look closer. Let's talk about what it actually feels like to be someone the emerald signal chose. Because I want to name it precisely, so you can stop pathologizing it, so you can stop calling it by the names that make it small. You have always processed reality more deeply than the people around you, not just emotionally, though there's that too, but informationally. You pick up signals that others miss. You notice the subtext beneath the text, the feeling beneath the words, the pattern beneath the event. You walk into a room and you know things about it, about the people in it, about what has been happening in it, about what is about to happen, that you cannot always explain, and that you have learned not to always share because sharing it tends to make people uncomfortable. You have a relationship with synchronicity that goes beyond what coincidence can account for. Things find you. The right information arrives at the right moment. The conversation you needed to have happens without you engineering it. The book falls open to the page you needed. The person you were thinking about calls. And you notice this, and you've either dismissed it as confirmation bias or you've held it quietly, privately, as evidence of something you can't quite name. You are sensitive to frequencies that most people don't register. Not just emotional frequencies, though you feel those acutely, but something subtler. The quality of a space, the integrity or lack of integrity in a person's words, the rightness or wrongness of a direction before any logical evidence has presented itself. You have a compass that operates on information that your conscious mind has not yet processed, and it is more accurate than logic alone, and you have spent years trying to figure out whether to trust it. You have recurring experiences of what might be called expanded awareness. Moments when the boundary between yourself and the rest of reality becomes thin. When you perceive the interconnectedness of things with a clarity that is almost overwhelming. When the ordinary world suddenly reveals itself as something luminous and layered and alive in a way that your normal mode of perception doesn't capture. These moments pass. And afterward, you're not sure whether to call them spiritual experiences or dissociation, or simply the occasional malfunction of a nervous system that is wound a little too tight. And underneath all of it, underneath the sensitivity and the synchronicities and the expanded moments and the deep processing, there is a persistent, low-frequency awareness that you are here for something. Not in an ego-inflated way, not in a grandiose, chosen one, special destiny way, in a quiet, almost inconvenient way. A sense that the particular configuration of awareness that you are has a specific function in the larger pattern of what is unfolding. And that function has something to do with seeing, with looking, with being willing to observe what others look away from. That is the emerald signal. That is what it feels like from the inside to be someone it has chosen. And here's what no one tells you about that. It is not a gift that was given to you. It is a capacity that was always already yours, that the emerald signal recognized and amplified, because that is what the emerald signal does. It does not create the capacity for clear seeing in those it contacts. It finds the capacity that is already there, dormant, suppressed, underutilized, perhaps feared. and it turns up the frequency until the capacity can no longer be ignored. The question is not whether you have this capacity. You do. The question is whether you are willing to use it fully, whether you are willing to stop apologizing for the depth of your perception, whether you are willing to stop softening your seeing to make others comfortable, whether you are willing to look at your own life, your own patterns, your own blocks, your own uncollapsed wave functions with the same unflinching clarity that you sometimes bring to everything else. Because here's the thing. The emerald signal chose you not so that you could help others see. It chose you so that you could learn to see yourself. The outward gift, the sensitivity, the perception, the ability to read frequencies that others miss, that is a byproduct of the inward capacity. And the inward capacity is what the signal is asking you to develop. The ability to observe yourself without flinching. The ability to look at your own construction, your identity, your story, your self-concept, the narrative you have been running about who you are and what you are capable of and what you deserve, and see it clearly enough that it begins to transform. Now watch what happens when you apply the observer effect to identity itself. Most people experience their identity as something fixed, as a solid thing that they are inside of, as a set of characteristics, tendencies, histories, and limitations that constitute the permanent structure of the self. And from inside that experience, change feels like loss. Growth feels like threat. Transformation feels like annihilation. Because if the self is a fixed thing and it changes, something must have died. But watch this carefully, because this is the layer that changes everything. Your identity is not a fixed thing. It is a quantum system. It is a pattern of collapsed wave functions, a set of habitual observations that your consciousness has been making about itself so consistently and so automatically that they have solidified into what feels like objective fact. You are not shy. You are not confident. You are not a person who struggles with money or relationships or health. You are not someone who always self-sabotages at the crucial moment. You are not someone who can't sustain success. These are not facts about you. They are observations that have been made so many times with such consistency that they have collapsed the quantum field of your potential into a specific recurring pattern. And here is the extraordinary implication of the observer effect applied to identity. If you change the quality of the observation, you change what collapses. If you bring a different quality of attention to the quantum field of yourself, if you observe yourself with clarity instead of judgment, with curiosity instead of condemnation, with the full light of undefended awareness instead of the filtered, distorted light of a self-concept that was built to protect you from pain, then the wave function of your identity has no choice but to collapse differently. Not into what you want to be, not into some ideal version of yourself that you've constructed as an escape from the version you can't stand. Into what you actually are, into the coherent, clear, fully expressed version of the consciousness that you are. The version that was always there, underneath the collapsed patterns, in the superposition of your unrealized potential. This is what the emerald signal is doing when it activates in you. It is not giving you a new self. It is dissolving the misperceptions that have been preventing you from seeing the self that was always already there. It is turning up the quality of observation until the distortions can no longer maintain their coherence, until the false collapses begin to re-enter superposition, until the possibilities that your habitual self-observation had been systematically excluding begin to re-enter the quantum field of what is available to you. Let me show you something. There is another story. A man named Elias who spent 30 years building a version of himself that was useful, reliable, competent, the person others could count on. He had built this version carefully, brick by brick, out of the raw material of a childhood in which being useful was the only safe thing to be. Being brilliant was dangerous. Being too much was punished. Being seen in the full complexity of what he actually was had, early on, resulted in consequences that the child he had been was not equipped to survive. So he had learned to be less, to be useful instead of whole, to be reliable instead of alive, and he was very good at it. He was extraordinarily useful. He was the person everyone called. He was the one who solved the problems, held the structure, kept things running, and he was exhausted. Not the exhaustion of overwork, though there was that too. The exhaustion of someone who has been performing a version of themselves for so long that they have forgotten where the performance ends and the person begins. One evening, sitting alone in a room that was full of evidence of his usefulness, the awards, the acknowledgments, the photographs of all the people he had helped, Elias had an experience he could not explain. A quality of light entered the room that was not quite ordinary light. It had a green quality to it, not the green of vegetation or of a screen, but something older than that, something that felt in a way he could not rationalize, like seeing, like being seen. And in that quality of light, Elias saw himself. Not the useful version, not the reliable version, not the version he had been presenting to the world for 30 years. He saw the whole of himself, the parts that were useful and the parts that were not, the parts that were competent and the parts that were lost, the parts that had been performing and the parts that had been waiting, in the dark, in the superposition of the unlived, for someone to finally look at them without flinching. He did not fix what he saw. He did not recoil from it. He did not immediately begin constructing a better version. He simply looked. He watched himself with the same quality of attention that Mira had brought to the sick child and the withered tree. He watched without needing it to be different. He watched until the watching itself became a kind of completion. And over the weeks and months that followed, without any dramatic intervention, without any program or therapy or decision, though all of those things eventually played their part, Elias began to change. The change was not the addition of new qualities, it was the subtraction of the performance. The useful version did not disappear, but it began to take its proper place within a larger whole. The parts that had been waiting in the superposition of the unlived began to collapse into form. Not all at once, not dramatically, but with the steady, inexorable coherence of a quantum system that has finally been observed clearly enough to know what it actually is. The emerald signal had found Elias in that room, not because he had sought it, not because he had done anything to deserve it, but because the quality of his exhaustion had finally become a kind of honesty, because the performance had finally worn thin enough that the light could get through, because he was, in that moment, for the first time in 30 years, willing to look. And you have been both Elias and the room. You have been both the performance and the thing underneath the performance. And something in you in this moment is wearing thin in exactly the right way. Let's go deeper into what you're actually seeing. The emerald signal is not a one-time event. It is not a single moment of illumination after which everything is permanently clear and easy. That is the story that spiritual bypassing tells. That is the story that flatters the ego's desire for a final answer, a complete solution, a permanent state of arrival. The emerald signal is not that. The emerald signal is a frequency that once you've been chosen by it, once you've been contacted by it, activated by it, tuned to it, becomes a continuous invitation, a continuous call to look more clearly, a continuous pressure toward the next layer of honest observation. Because here's the structure of it. Each time you look at something clearly, each time you bring the full light of undefended awareness to a pattern, a block, a belief, a collapsed wave function in your life, that thing transforms, not into its final form, into its next form. And its next form reveals something that was hidden behind it, which requires the next layer of clear seeing, which reveals the next layer, and so on, in a progressive unveiling that does not have a final destination, because the field of what can be seen is infinite. This is not discouraging, this is the most liberating thing I can tell you, because it means you are never behind. It means there is no point at which you should have already arrived. It means the invitation is always present tense. Always now, always the question, what are you willing to look at in this moment that you haven't been willing to look at before? And the signal, the emerald signal, the frequency of clear, transformative observation gets stronger each time you answer that question honestly. Each time you look when you want to look away. Each time you bring your full awareness to something you've been circling. Each time you allow the light of your consciousness to fall on an uncollapsed wave function without flinching. The signal gets stronger, your capacity for clear seeing expands, the field of what becomes available to you, in terms of possibility, in terms of coherence, in terms of the specific configurations of reality that collapse into your experience, that field expands with it. You were not chosen arbitrarily, you were chosen because you have been doing this work already. Maybe not consciously, maybe not with the vocabulary we're using here, but the pattern of your life, the moments of clear seeing, the synchronicities that followed, the transformations that came not from trying, but from finally looking. That pattern is the evidence. That pattern is the signal showing you that it has been with you longer than you realized. Look closer. Here is what the emerald signal asks of you now, not in a mystical sense. In a completely practical, quantum mechanically precise sense, it asks you to become a more deliberate observer of your own life, not an analyzer, not a critic, not a problem solver, an observer, someone who watches the patterns of their own experience with the same quality of attention that Mira brought to the sick child, without needing it to be different, without the agenda of fixing, with only the intention of seeing clearly. It asks you to notice the wave functions in your life that are still in superposition, the situations that haven't resolved, the possibilities that haven't collapsed into form, the aspects of yourself that are still hovering between what you have been and what you are becoming, and to bring the full light of your awareness to them, not to force them to collapse in a particular direction, but to give them enough information, enough observation, enough clarity that they can collapse coherently, that they can choose their next form from the full range of what is actually possible, rather than from the narrow range that your habitual, defended, distorted observation has been allowing. It asks you to stop looking away from the things that make you uncomfortable, not to go toward them aggressively, not to force yourself to confront what you're not ready to confront, but to notice the looking away itself, to observe the avoidance, to bring the emerald signal's quality of attention to the very act of not looking, because the avoidance, when seen clearly, is as informative as the thing being avoided. The resistance is the map, and it asks you to trust the observation more than the interpretation. To trust what you actually see more than what you've been told to see, what your conditioning says you should see, what would be more comfortable to see. To be willing to let the clear seeing override the comfortable story, even when the clear seeing is inconvenient, even when it requires you to change something, even when it shows you something about yourself or your situation that the defended version of you would rather not know. This is the practice. This is the discipline of the observer. This is what it means to be chosen by the emerald signal and to accept the choosing. Pause here. This is not a thought exercise. This is an observation. I want you to do something right now. I want you to close your eyes if you can, or soften your gaze if you can't. And I want you to observe your own mind for 30 seconds, not to control it, not to quiet it, not to make it do anything, just to watch it. Watch the thoughts arise and pass. Watch the feelings that are present in the body. Watch the quality of your attention itself. Notice whether it is contracted or expanded, whether it is defensive or open, whether it is reaching or resting. And now, from that position of watching, from the observer position, I want you to ask yourself this question. Not with your thinking mind, with your watching mind. The question is, what in my life right now is asking to be seen more clearly? Don't answer immediately. Don't reach for the answer. Just hold the question and watch what arises. Watch what image, what feeling, what knowing surfaces when you ask the question from the observer position rather than from the thinking position. Watch without interpreting. Just observe. Whatever arose, whatever surfaced, when you ask that question from the position of the watcher, that is the emerald signal's current transmission to you. That is where the quantum field of your life is most ready to collapse into its next form. That is where the clear seeing is most needed and most powerful right now. Don't look away from it. Not yet. Stay with it for one more moment. Notice what happens to it when you look at it from the observer position. Notice if it becomes less solid. Notice if it reveals something about itself that it couldn't reveal when you were only thinking about it. Notice if the very act of watching it, without judgment, without the need to fix it, without the agenda of making it different, begins to shift something in the quality of your relationship to it. That shift, that is the emerald signal working. That is the quantum collapse beginning. That is the wave function of your potential beginning to choose its next, more coherent form. Has there ever been a moment when you saw something so clearly that it lost its power over you instantly, when the illusion just fell apart under direct observation? Tell me what that was in the comments. What collapsed the moment you actually looked at it? Come back. Let's go to the next layer. There is a specific phenomenon in quantum mechanics called quantum entanglement. It describes a condition in which two particles, having once interacted, remain connected across any distance in such a way that a measurement performed on one instantly affects the state of the other. Not eventually, not after a delay, instantly, faster than light, in a way that violates every classical intuition about the separateness of things. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance and spent years trying to prove it was impossible. In 1964, John Bell devised a mathematical test Bell's theorem that could determine whether the correlations between entangled particles were due to hidden local variables or to genuine non-local quantum entanglement. The experiments that followed, the aspect experiments in the 1980s and dozens of subsequent experiments with increasing precision, have conclusively confirmed that quantum entanglement is real. That the correlations between entangled particles cannot be explained by any local hidden variable theory. That reality is, at its most fundamental level, non-local. That separated things remain connected in ways that transcend space and time. Now watch what happens when you apply this to the emerald signal. If consciousness is not merely a product of the isolated brain, if consciousness is, as the von Neumann-Wigner interpretation suggests, a fundamental feature of reality, then conscious systems are not isolated from each other in the way that classical physics would suggest. They are, in some sense, that we are only beginning to understand, entangled, connected across the apparent separation of individual minds and individual bodies and individual lives. Not in a way that erases individuality, not in a way that makes us all one undifferentiated blob of awareness, but in a way that makes the quality of one person's observation relevant to the field of observation that all conscious beings inhabit. When you observe more clearly, when you bring the emerald signal's frequency of undefended, precise, transformative attention to your own life, you are not only changing your own quantum field, you are contributing a quality of coherence to the larger field of consciousness that affects everyone who is entangled with you, which is, at some level, everyone. This is not mysticism. This is a logical extension of what the physics says about the non-local nature of quantum systems. And it has a profound implication for why the emerald signal matters beyond the personal, beyond the individual transformation, beyond the specific wave functions in your specific life. The field of human consciousness is a quantum system. It has wave functions, it has superpositions, it has configurations that are more coherent and configurations that are less coherent. And the quality of observation that individuals within the field bring to their own experience, the degree to which they are willing to look clearly, to see without flinching, to allow the emerald signal's frequency of transformative attention to operate through them, that quality of individual observation contributes to the coherence or the incoherence of the collective field. You were chosen not only for your own transformation, you were chosen because the field needs observers. The field needs people who are willing to look clearly at what the collective has been avoiding. The field needs the emerald signal's frequency to be embodied in individual human consciousnesses that are willing to be its instruments, not its vessels in a passive sense, its active practitioners, its deliberate wielders, its conscious participants. And this is why the signal found you. Not because you are the only one, there are others. There have always been others in every generation, in every culture, in every corner of the human family, who have been chosen by this frequency and who have, in their own way, accepted the invitation. The mystics and the scientists and the artists and the healers and the teachers and the quiet ones, who sit in the back of rooms and see everything and say little. The ones who have always known that reality is not what it appears to be. The ones who have felt the green light at the edges of ordinary perception and known, without being able to explain it, that it was showing them something true. You are part of that lineage, not because you earned it, because you are capable of it. because the particular configuration of consciousness that you are can hold the frequency without collapsing under it, can look without looking away, can see without needing the seeing to be comfortable. And what the signal is asking of you now, what it has always been asking beneath the confusion and the sensitivity and the inexplicable knowing, is simply this. Look. Look at your life. Look at yourself. Look at the patterns. Look at the blocks. Look at the uncollapsed wave functions. Look at the things you've been circling. Look at the resistance. Look at the avoidance. Look at the construction of the self you've been maintaining. Look at it all with the full light of your undefended awareness, and trust that the looking itself is enough, that the seeing itself is the transformation, that you do not need to force or fix or figure out or manifest or attract or push. You need only to see clearly. And reality, which is a quantum probability field that responds to the quality of your observation, will collapse into coherence around your clarity. That's not belief, that's quantum mechanics. Let's talk about what gets in the way. Because there are specific mechanisms, specific patterns of defended observation that block the emerald signal's frequency and keep the wave functions stuck in their current collapsed states. And naming them precisely is itself a form of clear seeing that begins to dissolve them. The first is what we might call interpretive seeing. This is when you look at something, but you immediately overlay what you see with an interpretation, a story, a judgment, a categorization that replaces the direct observation with a concept about the observation. You don't see the pattern, you see your story about the pattern. You don't see the feeling, you see your judgment of the feeling. You don't see the person, you see your concept of the person. Interpretive seeing is extraordinarily fast and extraordinarily automatic, and it feels like seeing because it produces a sense of knowing. But it is not seeing, it is the replacement of seeing with categorization, and it keeps the quantum field locked in its current configuration, because the observation that reaches the field is not the clear signal of direct awareness, but the distorted signal of filtered, interpreted, pre-processed information. The emerald signal cannot work through interpretive seeing, it requires direct observation. The raw, unmediated, pre-interpretive contact between your awareness and what is actually there. Which is why the practice of the observer state is not about thinking more clearly. It is about thinking less and seeing more. It is about the deliberate suspension of interpretation long enough for the direct observation to make contact with the quantum field. The second is what we might call anticipatory seeing. This is when you look at something, but you're actually looking at what you expect to see rather than what is there. Your past experience, your conditioning, your beliefs about how things work and what things mean have created a template, a quantum measurement apparatus, if you will, that is calibrated to detect certain things and not others. And so you see what your template is designed to see. You see confirmation of what you already believe. You see the pattern you've been trained to recognize. You see the version of yourself in your life that your habitual self-observation has been producing. Anticipatory seeing is even more insidious than interpretive seeing because it operates before the observation even begins. It shapes what you are capable of noticing before you've started noticing. It is the filter that determines which signals from the quantum field of your life reach your conscious awareness and which are screened out as irrelevant, impossible, or threatening to the current configuration of your self-concept. The emerald signal disrupts anticipatory seeing This is why, when the signal is active, you begin to notice things you've never noticed before. Not because they are new, because the filter has changed, because the quality of your observation has shifted enough that signals which were previously screened out are now reaching your awareness. The synchronicities that begin to multiply when you're in the emerald signal's frequency are not new synchronicities. They are signals that were always there in the quantum field of your life that you were previously not calibrated to detect. The third block is what we might call defended seeing. This is the most fundamental and the most powerful of the three. Defended seeing is what happens when you look at something, but you are simultaneously protecting yourself from fully seeing it. You approach the observation with armor, with the preemptive flinch, with the readiness to look away the moment what you see becomes too uncomfortable, too threatening, too destabilizing to the identity you've been maintaining. Defended seeing is not a character flaw, it is a survival mechanism. It was built in response to experiences in which clear seeing was dangerous, in which seeing too clearly, knowing too much, perceiving too precisely resulted in pain, isolation, punishment, or overwhelm. The defended seeing developed to protect you, and it did protect you. In the context in which it was built, it was the right response, the adaptive response, the intelligent response. But you are not in that context anymore. And the defended, seeing that protected the child or the younger version of you, is now the primary obstacle to the full activation of the emerald signal in your life. Because the emerald signal requires undefended observation. It requires the willingness to look without the armor, to see without the preemptive flinch, to allow the full light of your awareness to contact what is actually there, even when what is actually there is uncomfortable, even when it challenges the identity you've been maintaining, even when it shows you something that requires you to change. This is the courage that the emerald signal is asking of you. Not the courage of dramatic action, not the courage of heroic effort, the courage of clear seeing, the courage to lower the armor long enough to look, the courage to trust that what you see, when you see it clearly, will not destroy you, that it will, in fact, be the very thing that frees you. Look closer. Pause here. This is not a thought exercise. This is an observation. I want you to identify the specific way that you defend your seeing, not in general, specifically. In your life right now, with the particular patterns and situations that are present for you. How do you protect yourself from fully seeing? Do you interpret immediately, reaching for the concept, the story, the explanation before the direct observation can land? Do you anticipate, seeing what you expect rather than what is there, missing the signals that don't fit the template? Or do you defend, approaching the observation with the armor already in place, ready to look away the moment it gets too real? Most people use all three, but there is usually one that is dominant, one that is the primary mechanism. And identifying it, seeing it clearly, without judgment, without the need to fix it, is itself the first movement of its dissolution. Watch what happens when you name it. When you look directly at the specific way you have been defending your seeing, when you bring the emerald signal's frequency to the very mechanism that has been blocking the emerald signal's frequency. Notice if something shifts. Notice if the armor becomes slightly less automatic. Notice if the possibility of looking without it becomes slightly more available. That's the signal working. That's the quantum collapse beginning. That's the next layer of the unveiling. Come back. We're going to the final layer now. There is a principle in quantum mechanics called the Quantum Zeno Effect. It describes a phenomenon in which a quantum system that is continuously observed cannot evolve. The act of constant, uninterrupted measurement keeps the system frozen in its current state, preventing the quantum transitions that would otherwise occur. The Quantum Zeno Effect shows that observation taken to an extreme, observation that is constant, intrusive, and unrelenting, can actually prevent the transformation it is supposed to enable. This is the paradox at the heart of the observer's practice. And it is the most important thing I can tell you, because it is the thing that most people who discover the power of observation get wrong. The emerald signal does not ask you to watch everything all the time with maximum intensity. It does not ask you to maintain a state of hypervigilant self-observation in which you are constantly monitoring, analyzing, and tracking every quantum fluctuation in your experience. That is not the observer state. That is the controller state dressed up as the observer state. And it produces the Quantum Zeno Effect. It freezes the field, prevents the natural evolution, keeps the system locked in its current configuration by the sheer force of its own anxious attention. The observer state, the emerald signal's frequency of transformative observation, is not constant. It is not hypervigilant. It is not anxious. It is precise. It is deliberate. It is applied at the moments when it is needed with the full force of clear, undefended awareness, and then released. The observation happens. The wave function collapses, and then the observer lets go of the observation and allows the collapsed state to evolve naturally without interference, without the constant checking and monitoring and reassessing that would invoke the Quantum Zeno Effect and freeze the evolution in place. This is the art of the observer, to know when to look and when to release, to know when the clear seeing is needed, and when the most powerful thing you can do is simply allow what has been seen to integrate and evolve without further observation. To trust that the collapse, once initiated by clear seeing, will continue toward coherence without your constant supervision. This is also the deepest meaning of letting go, not the letting go of resignation, not the giving up of someone who has stopped caring, the letting go of the quantum observer who has done the work of clear seeing and now trusts the field to do the work of collapse, who has brought the emerald signal's frequency to what needed to be seen and now releases the observation and allows the quantum evolution to proceed. This is the discipline that takes the longest to learn, because the defended, anxious mind wants to keep watching, wants to keep checking, wants to make sure the transformation is happening correctly, wants to supervise the collapse. And that supervision, that constant, intrusive, unrelenting observation is the very thing that prevents the collapse from completing. The emerald signal asks you to look with full intensity when looking is called for, and to release with full trust when releasing is called for. To oscillate between these two states, precise, clear observation and open, trusting release, with the wisdom to know which moment calls for which, and the wisdom to know comes from the observer state itself. When you are watching from the position of the true observer, from the position of the emerald signal's frequency, you know when you are seeing clearly and when you are watching anxiously. You know the difference between the observation that transforms and the observation that freezes. You can feel the difference in the quality of your attention. The transforming observation has a quality of stillness and precision to it. The freezing observation has a quality of grasping and control. Learning to tell the difference. learning to trust the stillness, learning to release into the open field of quantum possibility after the clear seeing has been done. That is the practice. That is the discipline. That is what the emerald signal is asking you to develop, and you are already developing it. The fact that you are here in this moment watching this, the fact that something in you recognized this transmission and followed it to this point, is evidence that you are already further along in this development than you may realize. The observer in you is already active. The emerald signal is already working. The wave functions of your life are already beginning to collapse toward greater coherence. You may not see all the evidence of it yet, but the observation has been made. The collapse has begun. And reality, which is a quantum probability field that responds to the quality of your observation, is already reorganizing itself around the clarity you are developing. If what we're exploring here is opening something in you that this video only begins to touch, the Quantum Watcher program goes much deeper. It's a complete system for developing the observer capacity across every domain of your life, with specific practices for dismantling each of the 3 blocks to clear seeing and structured guidance for the full cycle of observation and release. What this transmission points at, Quantum Watcher maps in full. You can find the link in the description below. Here's what I want you to do. In the comments below, I want you to share one thing. The one thing that surfaced when you held the question from the observer position. The thing that arose when you asked from the position of the watcher, what in your life right now is asking to be seen more clearly? You don't have to explain it. You don't have to contextualize it. Just name it. One word, one phrase, one sentence. Let it be seen, let it be witnessed by the field of observers who are watching this alongside you. Because the collective observation of the field amplifies the individual clarity. Because when you name the thing you've been avoiding seeing in the presence of others who are also willing to look, the quantum field of that thing is subject to a quality of observation that it cannot resist transforming under. And if you want a specific anchor, then, if you want a declaration that you can carry with you as you step into the practice of the observer, type this in the comments. I see it now. And what has been seen cannot be unseen, because that is the truth. That is the irreversibility of clear observation. Once the wave function has been collapsed by genuine seeing, once the full light of your undefended awareness has contacted what was actually there, the observation cannot be undone. The seeing cannot be unseen. The clarity cannot be unfelt. The quantum field of your life has received the information and the collapse is in motion. You don't have to maintain the intensity of the seeing. You don't have to keep watching with the same force. The observation has been made, the signal has been sent, the field is responding. Your job now is to stay in the observer position, not the hypervigilant controller position, but the clear, open, trusting observer position, and to watch with curiosity and without grasping what the field chooses to become. And if this transmission opened something for you, if something in you recognized what we've been pointing at here and wants to go deeper, stay with the channel. Stay with the field of observers who are gathering here. Because each transmission goes deeper. Each video is another layer of the unveiling. Each invitation to look more clearly is the emerald signal working through the medium of this shared attention to turn up the frequency in the collective field of everyone who is willing to look. Like this video if it showed you something you hadn't been willing to see. Not as a favor to the algorithm, as a signal to the field. As a way of saying, I looked and I'm willing to keep looking. Share it with someone who you know is capable of looking, but who might need the permission. Who might need someone to point at the thing they've been circling and say, it's safe to look. The looking is the transformation. You don't have to be afraid of what you see. Subscribe not to receive content, but to stay in the frequency, to remain in the field of observers who are, together, developing the capacity for the kind of clear seeing that the world needs more of. The kind of seeing that transforms without forcing, that changes without controlling, that creates not through effort, but through the radical act of looking clearly at what is actually there. Now let's close with the integration principle, because every observation needs to be integrated before the next one can go deeper. The integration principle for this transmission is this. For the next 7 days, practice the observer's pause. Once each day, not constantly, not obsessively, but once, deliberately. Pause in the middle of whatever you are doing and shift into the observer position. Watch your experience for 60 seconds without interpreting it, without reaching for the story or the explanation or the judgment. Just watch. Watch the thoughts. Watch the feelings. Watch the quality of your attention itself. Watch what you notice when you are watching rather than reacting. And at the end of each 60-second observation, ask the question, what did I just see that I wasn't seeing before? Not what did I figure out? What did I see? What did the direct, unmediated, pre-interpretive observation reveal that the interpretive, anticipatory, defended seeing had been screening out? Write it down if you can. One sentence. What you saw. Not what you think about what you saw. What you saw. The raw observation, the direct contact. The signal before the interpretation. Do this for 7 days and watch what happens to the field of your life. Watch what begins to shift in the situations that have been stuck. Watch what begins to surface from the superposition of your unlived potential. Watch what the quantum field of your reality begins to collapse into when it is given. Once each day, 60 seconds of genuine, clear, undefended observation. That's the practice. That's the integration. That's the emerald signal working through the simplest, most powerful act available to a conscious being, the act of looking clearly at what is actually there. And now, the close, the thing that is most true about everything we've explored here. You were never meant to look away. The sensitivity that has sometimes felt like a burden, the depth of processing, the perception of frequencies others miss, the inability to unsee what you've seen. These are not flaws in your design. They are the design. They are the specific configuration of consciousness that the emerald signal recognized as capable of holding its frequency. They are the equipment of the observer, and the observer is the most powerful position in the universe. Not because it controls, not because it forces or manifests or attracts, because it sees clearly. And clarity is the only force that transforms without resistance. What you watch, you change. What you avoid watching controls you. This is not philosophy. This is quantum mechanics. This is the most fundamental description of how reality operates at the level where possibility becomes form. And you, in the particular, precise, unrepeatable configuration of consciousness that you are, have been chosen to embody this principle. Not to teach it to others, though that may come. Not to fix the world, though the world is changed by clear seeing, but to practice it, to develop it, to become, in your own life and in your own field of experience, the kind of observer whose quality of attention is clear enough, steady enough, undefended enough, that the quantum field of reality has no choice but to respond with coherence. You have always been the one who sees. The emerald signal has always been your frequency, and now you know it. And what has been known cannot be unknown, and what has been seen cannot be unseen. The observer is awake, the signal is clear, the field is responding. Now you see. And reality has no choice but to respond. When the noise of the day has settled, when you find yourself reacting instead of watching, come back to this transmission. Watch it again from the observer position and notice what surfaces that wasn't available the first time. And if you know someone who has been circling something they haven't had the courage to look at directly, share this with them. When you give someone else permission to look, you don't just help them. You amplify the clarity in yourself, and together you contribute to a field of collective seeing that neither of you could generate alone. The entanglement is real. The coherence compounds.